Success is being able to wake up every day and do what I love. One of the lines that I always say is, stop waiting to be who you already are.
In 2005, a young woman in Los Angeles had an idea. Melody Ehsani had long envisioned herself as someone who would follow in the familial and cultural path laid out for her, spending her adult years practicing law. But as she gained real-world experience in that field, she became disenchanted with that vision of her future. So she dove fully into what had for years only been a peripheral passion: design. What started with a collection of heels sold hand-to-hand off MySpace would ultimately morph into a fully realized streetwear brand, Me, with a flagship store on Fairfax in LA and buzzy collabs with brand Jordan, not to mention a creative director role at Foot Locker. And it all started with one idea.
How did your parents' professional lives inform your creative ambition?
Well, my dad passed away when I was 10. You know, he was a civil engineer, but he was an artist. Like, he painted, he was in a band when he was younger. He did a lot of different types of creative things, but never professionally. And it was the same for my mom. Like, she was also a painter, but she had never made money off of her art. She was also often the smartest person in the room, the most resourceful, but she was always taking a back seat to my dad when he was alive, or my uncles, or somebody. What I ended up doing is doing everything she didn't do. She was an incredible provider. She went to cosmetology school right after my dad died, and she became a hairstylist and supported us completely, which was incredible, but she never had anything that was her own. It was a very different system. It was like kind of a cultural system that I didn't want to rely on.
In high school, you worked in the mall doing retail. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and sort of what are the lasting things that you took away from that?
Well, I actually hated retail. I really hated working in the mall. You know, you're on your feet for hours. I was never a salesperson. I think more than anything, I liked the community in the mall, because I knew people that worked at all the stores, and you know, my friends, I'd get my friends jobs, or we would work together. So it was sort of more of a social thing than it really was anything else. Obviously, I paid attention to the trends, and I loved fashion, and I just kind of did things that I thought everybody was good at, but I didn't realize until later not everybody's good at. I get creatively blocked all the time. I just try to shake things up somehow. Like, for me, I generally need to get out of the physical space that I'm in into another space, and then that usually helps me get into a different mindset.
As you started to grow up through high school and obviously gravitate in creative directions, even if it was kind of the most nascent stages, was your family supportive of that?
My mom was incredibly supportive of me until I was in college. After college, I was supposed to go to law school, and they were thrilled. And I decided not to go to law school. I dropped out maybe like a week after I had gotten in. Then I think she started to really focus on me getting married. Like, that became my family and her focus.
Did they eventually come around?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, at some point my mom was working for me.
Wow, that's an amazing moment.
Yeah, it took a while, but she's so proud of me. She's my #1 fan.
What was it that had drawn you to the law?
Really, it was justice. I was always the one in my family that like stood up against racism or sexism. Like, I think I noticed things like that from a very young age. I didn't think that you could advocate for something like that outside of the law. You know, I didn't know that there was other ways that you could do it. I just thought justice, law, it's the only thing.
And what ultimately derailed that?
Well, I got an internship on Capitol Hill, and I worked there for a while. And I was just so disenchanted. I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna make a change or do anything within this system. Everything about it was kind of a little bit daunting. I was like, I love the idea of this, but I don't know how I'm gonna wake up every day for the rest of my life and do this. It's gonna kill me. I found myself doing more creative things on the side as an outlet. And then I realized that I just had to find whatever it was that I would be excited about getting up every morning to do, and that wasn't it.
What were the kinds of creative things that you were investing your time in?
I'm a Baha'i, it's my spiritual practice, and we'd have these like big Baha'i youth conferences all the time, and there were never any cool t-shirts. And so I was like, why hasn't anybody made a cool Baha'i t-shirt? So I designed a line of shirts and they just blew out, like people lost their minds. And I was like, wow, I so loved doing it.
You decided you're going to not accept the invitation to go to law school. What is like day one, step one of I have to figure this out?
Yeah, well, I was depressed for a while. I went through a long process of trying to figure things out, and I ended up speaking to this woman who is sort of like an intuitive, and she sees you, for lack of a better word, and it was the first time I really felt like somebody saw me. She said that, you know, you are really practical, which you get from your dad, and you're really creative, which you get from your mom, and the combination of those two things, you would be really good with product design. And I was like, what's product design? Like, I didn't even know what it was. And she was like, do some research. And I was like, oh, the #1 school in the country for product design is in Pasadena. I just started taking night classes. The first night I went to class, my whole mind was blown because it was like all these things that I was naturally drawn towards that I looked at and analyzed and thought about anyway were sort of being presented in a class. And I was like, I already kind of know this stuff. I just don't know how to draw, like I don't have any of the technical skills. Ideally, I wanted to go into car design, or I wanted to design vacuums or cell phones at Apple or wherever, but it wasn't that easy to break into those kinds of places without school or without having some kind of, like I didn't have a portfolio. So I started in fashion, I just started making things. When I first started, I thought my disadvantage was not having any formal training. Now I feel like that's one of my bigger advantages because I wasn't trained within a system, so I kind of naturally think outside of it. In hindsight, I really appreciate that and I like that, and I feel like that's what's kind of set me apart in my own way.
How long into school did it take before that heart of things came into focus for you? Like, okay, this is something that's more approachable or more immediately doable?
I got an internship at Creative Recreation, which was a sneaker company back then. Rich, the designer, started teaching me how to use Illustrator. I mean, just through watching him, I learned about the production process of shoes and material process, like just all the processes, just watching him do it. I hung around there for a while and I thought that they would hire me, but they didn't. And so I kind of reached a dead end. I was like, I don't know what to do. It's like, I don't need to go to school anymore because I picked up the technical skills that I need. And I don't know how else to get a job because who's gonna hire me again? Like, who am I? I started doing research into factories that would produce my own design. The only factories that would get back to me were the ones in China. And so I moved to China.
Wow, that's quite a move.
Yeah, so I moved there and I made my first collection and then I came back.
How did you fund the first collection?
Through my savings.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
So you were really all in.
Yes.
I'm gonna gamble everything on myself.
Yeah, it was life-changing.
Now across the globe and away from her friends and family, with her savings depleted, Ehsani had to go all in on her business. But to do so, she'd have to learn the ins and outs beyond design, from production and manufacturing to marketing and sales. And she'd have to do it all on the fly. Before long, though, her interest would move from heels to jewelry and apparel. And in that revelation, a collection would become a brand.
You create a line. What exactly does that entail? Like how many SKUs and...
I think I started off with 12 pairs of shoes, and they were all women's shoes, like heels. And I was also clubbing a lot back then, so I'd go out, my friends would go out, they'd wear them, and then I would do photo shoots with them on the street. I would sell it on MySpace. I saw a hole in the market for heels that were interesting. Sneakers always had such great narratives around them. It was always a story or a colorway that represented something, but I never really saw that reflected in heels. My first goal was just to figure out how to make something. Before that time, I was on a very linear sort of like law school route. So the fact that I could think of something that I wanted made and then could actually get it made was mind-blowing to me. I mean, I'm still fascinated by the process of it. And it was so exciting and fulfilling that I thought to myself, like, I don't care what comes after it, I'll figure it out. And I never even really thought of it as a company until I started making enough money for it to be a company. And then people were like, what's your business plan? What's your blah, blah, blah? And I was like, oh, I never thought about that.
How did the line start to evolve once you are now selling heels and you have, you know, an audience and a website?
Yeah, so the shoemaking process is really lengthy. It takes 3 months, I'd say, to get a shoe to where you want. In between the concept of the shoe and then the shoe actually arriving, I had a lot of free time. So that's when I got into jewelry. I had a desire to like make things with my hands, and it was also so exciting to me because in terms of narratives, you could tell so much more with jewelry than you could with a shoe. So the jewelry took off right away. This is like one of the acrylic pieces that we make. It says "F racism," it's a choker. One of the more recent things we've made, which is cool, it goes like that.
That's dope.
Yeah, but we do a lot of things with plexiglass, which is really fun.
What was the hole in the market that you felt was waiting to be filled?
I was making things that were really thoughtful, that had stories, that resonated with people, but they didn't cost a lot of money. There was a sweet spot where I would have, I don't know, like Rihanna wear this whole gown, like these expensive items, but then she's wearing like my $40 necklace, you know? There wasn't a lot of that in the market, and we didn't have things like Etsy Instagram wasn't even around. Nothing was, so you didn't have as much access.
You said that the reaction to the jewelry was rather instantaneous. Like, what does that mean in a 2007, 2008?
It was word of mouth. I think women have always been really gifted at spreading word about something they love around the world faster than the internet. I've said that so many times, but it's really true.
And how long from dropping that first collection of heels was it until you got to the place where you were sustaining yourself and you were like, okay, this is my real occupation from now on?
Yeah, because at the beginning it was like I would order 1,000 pairs of shoes and I'd have them in my kitchen. And then I'd be like, all right, if I sell 3 pairs a week, I can cover my gas, I could cover my apartment, I could cover all my stuff. It was like 3 or 4 years before I could properly sustain myself.
I understand there was an incident, you lost an entire shipment of the line to customs. What happened?
Yeah, that's when I stopped doing shoes, actually. US Customs is really like the mafia. They're the worst. Customs confiscated the entire shipment, and they claimed that my factory had used knockoff YKK zippers. So I contacted the factory and they were like, no, we bought them from YKK. We have the receipt. If I wanted to go up against them to get the shoes back, I'd have to put up like $30,000 of my own money. And if I lost the case against them, then they would keep the $30,000 and charge me their attorney fees. And so I just kind of had to let them keep the shipment. It kind of crushed me a little bit after that. Like, I never did business the same way. And so I just put all my focus into the jewelry after that. I guess it's like a deep gut feeling whenever I need to pivot. It's like how animals know when an earthquake is coming or something. I just feel it kind of in my stomach, in my gut.
The jewelry explodes over those next few years. What are the steps from there to, say, like opening the store on Fairfax?
More than anything, it was getting my name out. Within maybe a year after that, Reebok reached out to me and asked me if I would be a part of like some shoe collaboration with them. I was so happy to do it because I was back to shoes and I never thought I'd do shoes again. Part of my deal with them was that they would pay me my design fee and then I would be able to sell them on my website a week before they released them to wherever else.
And I imagine that worked out quite well for you?
Yeah, it worked out really well. We put them up on Friday, like praying and hoping that maybe the 100 would sell. And we came back on Monday and I think we had sold like a few thousand of them online. But we called Reebok and thankfully they were able to fulfill the rest of the order.
When did you decide that it was time to open up a retail brick and mortar?
Yeah, so the first like big chunk of money I got was from selling shoes with Reebok.
Okay.
So as soon as I had that chunk of money is when I opened the store.
And what was your vision for that?
Yeah, it was really just to create a space where I could give background to the things that we were making. And I was super hesitant, like I said, because I never liked retail. But I was like, well, if we can make this sort of a community spot where we can display this stuff really cool and people can come in and know what the stories are behind everything, that's kind of what inspired me.
What was the scene in Fairfax like? Obviously, you know, it has become quite an epicenter for all things streetwear and cool. But in 2010, 2011, I would imagine it was slightly different.
You know, the reason why I wanted to be there was because it was one of the only streets in LA that still felt like LA. Fairfax was sort of one of those untouched streets. It had that cool hybrid of things that were so LA that had kind of been mulled over in other areas already. It still is a very like Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. So, you know, there's a synagogue on the corner, there's a bunch of Jewish grocery stores. And then you had Supreme, Diamond. Odd Future had just opened up. That's how I came back to it.
Were you the only store there that was catering to young women?
Yes.
Having now been the proprietor of a retail establishment for about a decade, have you learned to enjoy the retail side of things at all?
Yeah. There's definitely parts of it I enjoy and parts of it I still don't. I think the management aspect of it is difficult for me just because I'm more of a creative. Getting into the weeds of like how it runs, who runs it, that sort of thing is really difficult for me because I always have an idea for how it should be, but it's really difficult to execute because you have to find the right people. Spending my time trying to do that as opposed to designing something is hard for me.
How did you pivot back into the apparel side of things from the jewelry?
So when I was at Reebok, after 2 years, I think they let me do apparel. And so I started making full outfits for them, and that really excited me because I was like, oh, this is so cool. We can complete the look. So even with the other things that I made, the jewelry, the earrings, whatever, you could present the whole girl. And then we started making apparel ourselves after that, and it was really difficult. When I was working with other companies, they were doing mostly everything overseas, and you would really just like show them a picture and they would find it in a day for you, versus us having to drive all around downtown and call like 86 million people to figure out like where we can get this specific type of snap from.
And how was the reception or the appetite from the audience?
You know, I think it was growing. We were experimenting a lot. So say we would put out like 10 items and 2 of them would sell out right away and people would be super excited about them, and then the other 8 would just sit there.
Were there, along the way, mishaps and things that did not come out how you wanted them to?
All the time. We would get stuff garment dyed and it was supposed to be one color and it would come out a completely different color. Or we'd want it tie-dyed in this way and they would do it another way, or they'd use the wrong fabric for something.
Up until that point, you're basically self-funding and just reinvesting profits.
Yeah.
Taking a little bit off the table for yourself to live.
Yeah, barely taking. Like I was taking money out to pay for my mortgage and my food, but I wasn't really even taking any money for myself. Occasionally I would do collaborations or I'd take on design projects that paid me, and then I would invest that into the business or pay whoever I needed to pay to get whatever done. It's so crazy because it's almost like I woke up and 10 years had passed. Like I just sort of like kept my head down and worked the whole time. I was like, we have to make this, we have to figure it out, we have to make it work. So I would do anything for support. Like I had just sort of gotten to that point.
Eager to take on the next steps of the business, and with an awareness that reaching those heights would require change, Ehsani took on investment for the first time. Now with a partner who could help ease some of the friction she's been facing, Ehsani has continued to expand the reach of Me, while also taking on a variety of side projects that complement the brand's growth.
We were talking about deciding right before the pandemic to take on investment. What is that process like?
I started to feel like maybe ownership wasn't as much as I thought it was. Like prior to that, I really wanted to build this empire and I was thinking that I wanted to do it on my own. And I was like, it would actually be a lot better if I allowed somebody to invest and I received that kind of strategic support. Over the years, I had received requests and I was just very arrogant about it. I was like, nope, no, I don't want to, By the time I was ready for it, it was something that I had to solicit, and it was really difficult. I started learning about all the different types of investors that you could take on, and I didn't want somebody that had just given me money and then was immediately looking for a return on their money. I wanted somebody that believed in me and that saw what I was trying to do and maybe had something else to offer. The investor that I ended up taking on was the first and only one that I met with that didn't come in and try to tell me all the things that I needed to change about the business, but instead was like, I love what you're doing, like really got it. He's taking on a lot of the logistical things that I didn't particularly enjoy doing before, which allowed me to start being able to make clothing in a different way than I had done before. Like that allowed me to do like my husband's band, like the Chili Peppers went on a world tour, which means like 80,000 people a night, and they've never had tour merch that they've liked before. And so we got to sort of take over their entire merch business, which was huge, like literally starting another company, and I would have never been able to do that had he not been able to help me with the production. We did a collaboration with Levi's. Levi's had this new technology where they laser print the photo straight onto the garment. So I took all these old iconic pictures of Flea and I sort of made them like a scrapbook, like kind of in high school how you would make a scrapbook of like your crush. Did like he loves me not. And I found all these cool pictures.
Amazing.
And we call them Levi's. And then this is kind of what we've all lived in.
A pandemic
A
fit
pandemic fit, yeah, just our sweatsuits. And we hand dye them all in LA. It's sort of become a staple of the brand.
How did the pandemic impact the business?
A lot of people wanted sweatsuits, but all our supply chains were messed up. So it's like there was a demand, but we didn't have, like our factories were shutting down, or we couldn't find enough like cotton for a while. So that really affected things. And then also in terms of labor. I had to start laying people off, and then we had a store in New York that we had to shut down because we were just paying rent. We were planning on opening a store in London, and that whole plan just sort of crumbled, where we were like, okay, hold on. Are we still gonna do retail? Like, is retail gonna be a thing? That really refocused everything for us. If we can only make certain things, what would they be? Who are we gonna hire? What roles are most important? And after paring it down to working again, like going back to an environment where it was like me and 3 people again, I really enjoyed it. After the pandemic stopped, I was like, I don't really want to hire more people. So that's been probably the biggest change, is not having like a whole office of people, but having like a really tight crew.
Your Jordan collab, how did that come together, and what is the nature of that relationship?
I was friends with some of the guys that worked at Jordan, mainly Frank Cooker. Frank had followed my work since Reebok.
Okay.
And he brought me in. My goal had always been to do something with Jordan.
Did you know what your first Jordan was going to look like in your head before?
No, Jordan and Nike, I feel like, run super tight. I think that's why they've had so much success. And so they're very particular about what they let you do and what they don't let you do. You know, there's certain things that just don't fit in with their culture or whatever. Whereas Reebok was struggling with that when I was there. You know, they were very confused, but it was also amazing because they'd let me do whatever I wanted. But then going to Jordan, it was very different. It was like, well, here's your toolbox, and here are the things that could fit, and this is how it fits in with what we're doing right now. And we actually went through a number of things before Frank really advocated for me to work on the ones. I was really inspired by Hank Willis Thomas and his artwork. He makes these lenticular prints, and I really wanted to make a lenticular shoe, and I had an idea for it, and I was set on the idea, and it was the only thing that I wanted to do. And we worked on that shoe for over a year, and they just couldn't source the fabric. They kept getting different qualities of lenticular, but it just wasn't right. Gmo, who was the head at the time, called me and he was like, hey, if we don't get this design in by Friday, you're not gonna have a shoe. And it was Wednesday or Tuesday or something. So they flew me to Portland the next morning. I literally got on the first flight, and Paul, who was one of the head designers there, and I like literally just went into the materials library and just worked all day on the shoe and came up with something at the end of the day. So that shoe was designed in a day.
That's crazy.
Yeah. When I did my other Jordans, they were only sized for women, which was great, but they finally gave me my first on-court shoe to do.
Where did the inspiration for the snakeskin come from?
I had never really seen snakeskin shoes done on court properly. And on the inside it says standing on the shoulders of greats, just sort of honoring those who come before us. I find whenever I'm not too in my head about things, then I get ideas, which sounds counterproductive because usually ideas come from your thoughts. But for me, it's kind of the opposite.
Last year, you were announced as the creative director for women's at Foot Locker. Mm-hmm. How did that opportunity come to you, and what has the experience been like?
Well, they had created the role for me, which was kind of cool. So they called me. It was pretty timely, actually, because I had just started thinking that I'd be ready to take on a role like that. Like I said, I had just taken on The Investor, so I had felt all this new sort of creative energy that I had. And it sounded like a really cool opportunity. I've always wanted to work with a company that dealt more so with a mass market versus a lot of the companies I had worked with prior, where like the Jordans, for example, of course I love them, but they only made a certain amount. And for the next like 3 years, you're just gonna get harassed because you didn't make enough. And so it was really cool to work with a company whose whole thing was like making something for everyone, you know?
And how do you manage the juggling between your own brand and their brand, as I imagine?
It's a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a lot. I took on way too much. I think I did a collection every month for like 7 months, which was really, really hard because I'm not that kind of designer. You know, I take my time, I do a lot of research, I have a process. It was especially tricky because I wasn't inspired during the pandemic. You know, it's like nobody's wearing anything. Like I know I was wearing the same thing every other day. There was this feeling of like doom and gloom in a lot of ways. You know, you weren't particularly in a joyful mood, but it was actually kind of a blessing because I think it pulled me out of that and really helped me zone into a different kind of world and produce what we needed to produce. I don't think I have an ultimate creative goal. My only goal is to continue to grow and to never sort of become stagnant or content.
As you think about the business next year and the years to come, what are the goals that you have set for yourself?
For the last year, I've really questioned, like I said, how I've been working this whole time and if I'm actually working smarter versus harder. And I'm trying to figure out the things that I love doing the most and how to do them better. In a lot of ways, I'm just going back to the core of things that I really love. One of them is the justice aspect of things. How can we have products that are more meaningful or purposeful? Like they could still be exactly what they are, but how can we put these little messages or whatever it is that we do and have them have bigger impacts in the world? Understanding sustainability is a big goal of mine because it's such a big conversation. And I think the other thing is figuring out women's sports and the sports market more. You know, I love women's basketball. There's so much inequality there, and I feel like I'm trying to find my place in how I can help elevate it in whatever way I can. Obviously, I think that that's gonna probably be through product because even the women's product is inferior in the market. Just kind of learning more about that and finding where I fit in there because I just love it so much.
As an entrepreneur, do you have sort of a way that you maintain composure through the ups and downs of the business?
Well, first, detaching from anything material was big for me because the thing is, it's never been about money anyway. I wanted to make money. The only way I could make more stuff is if I made more money. And it would really frustrate me that I could only make like 4 things this season because I didn't have enough money to make 10, you know? I would wake up and do it for free every day. So the fact that I'm getting anything from it is huge.